All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is another episode. We'll call it an episode of Left Bank Books presenting a virtual event. So this is tonight. We are incredibly enthusiastic and happy to welcome the American Library Association Stonewall Award-winning author, Lucy Jane Bledsoe, who will discuss her multi-layered gem of a novel, Tell the Rest. Lucy Jane Bledsoe will be in conversation with National Center for Lesbian Rights' Amy Whelan. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Lucy Jane, Amy, and the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for your friends on our website, left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating. It allows us to keep producing these virtual events. So I want to thank you for your support. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the event coordinator for Left Bank Books. We produce hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have a lot of in-person events planned for this spring, but we will continue to offer virtual events and hybrid events into the virtual world. So if you are near or far, you can join our events. And be sure to check out our event calendar on our website for full details about our upcoming event programming. We have some amazing authors. I'm in conversation with award-winning author Rebecca Mackay next week that you can watch from anywhere. But now, about tonight's book. Two estranged childhood friends find themselves on parallel paths to return to the site of the conversion therapy camp that tore them apart. Meg Waite Clayton, the New York Times bestselling author of The Last Train to London, says, "A multi-layered gem of a novel, polished, intelligent, and moving. Tell the Rest deftly explores courage, drive, happiness, sexuality, love, and more in a riveting story that whisks readers along to a surprising and satisfying conclusion. I could not put it down." Delia Barnes and Ernest Rangham met as teens at Celebration Camp, a church-supported conversion therapy program, a dubious, unscientific Christian practice meant to change a person's sexuality. After witnessing a close friend suffer a devastating tragedy in the hands of the camp counselors, they escape in the night, only to take separate roads to their distant homes. They have no idea how each have fared through the years. Delia is a college basketball coach who prides herself on being an empowering and self-possessing role model for her players. But when she gets fired from her elite East Coast college and loses her wife to another woman in rapid succession, she returns to her hometown of Rockside, Oregon to coach the girls' basketball team at her high school alma mater. Ernest, meanwhile, is a renowned poet in New York City who's left behind his loving husband for a temporary teaching job in Portland, Oregon. His work has always been boundary-pushing, fearless, but the poem he's most wanted to write about his dangerous escape from Celebration Camp remains stubbornly out of reach. Both remain on a mission to overcome the consequences and inhumane costs of conversion therapy. As events find them hurtling towards each other once again, they both grapple with the necessity of remaining steadfast in one's truth, no matter how slippery that can be. Tell the Rest is a powerful novel about coming to terms with family, history, violence, loss, sexuality, and ultimately with love. And now about our speakers. Lucy Jane Bledsoe is the author of several works of fiction, including A Thin Bright Line, which was a Lambda Literary Award and Farrow Grumley Award finalist. She is the winner of an American Library Association Stonewall Award, a Yadu Fellowship, a California Arts Council Fellowship in Literature, 2 National Science Foundation Artists and Writers Fellowships, and a finalist for the Northern California Independent Booksellers Association Fiction Award. A native of Portland, Oregon, she now lives in Berkeley, California. Tonight, Lucy Jane Bledsoe will be in conversation with Amy Whelan. Amy is an experienced civil rights attorney with a passionate commitment to ending conversion therapy. In 2018, Amy represented conversion therapy survivor Kate McCobb in one of the nation's first lawsuits challenging a conversion therapist under a state law prohibiting consumer fraud. Before joining Born Perfect, Amy was an associate at the San Francisco firm of Rosen, Bien, Galvin, and Grunfeld, LLP, where she was a part of the trial team in Coleman, Plata versus Schwarzenegger, a successful lawsuit challenging the California prison system's unconstitutional provision of medical and mental health care. In addition to representing conversion therapy survivors, Amy provides legal assistance and advice to federal, state, and local legislators drafting laws to end this harmful practice. Amy received her BA from Princeton University and her JD from Northeastern University School of Law. Amy is also the senior staff attorney for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And now, without further ado, wherever you are, would you please help me in warmly welcoming our guests for the evening, Lucy Jane Bledsoe and Amy Whelan for Left Bank Books. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there.
I'm going to turn this over to you for this incredible conversation. I'm really excited to hear more about the book.
Thanks, Shane.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so happy that Amy's here with me. I did a ton of research into conversion therapy for this book, and I know that Amy's an expert for working for that wonderful organization, Born Perfect, which is the perfect name for that organization. So I'm really happy to be here in conversation. I have a lot of questions for you. So
same. That was actually one of my first questions. I was curious about the research you did, because anyway, we should talk about the themes of the conversion therapy in the book. But I was reading it and I was really reminded of our clients and the people who we work with through our project.
So I hope that means it rang true.
Yeah.
Well, the Born Perfect website's wonderful. And you have a whole lot of videos of survivors speaking about their experiences. And that was one place where I got a lot of good information. I talked to a lot of people in person. There was so much surprising stuff in the research I did that was really interesting to me. I mean, one thing I want to say at the very top, well, I have a couple questions, but when people ask what the book's about, I noticed I've been avoiding saying it's about conversion therapy, which is sort of silly because that's the heart, in a way, of the novel. But people recoil right away, and it's a topic people don't want to hear about. And I realized one of the reasons I've been avoiding is because I care so much. What I want to write about is how people thrive and survive, as opposed to sort of mucking around in the hard part of it. And one of the best places I got information about that were from the survivors themselves, how many have taken that experience and done amazing things with it. One thing that really surprised me too is how many people who have been through conversion therapy knew at the time as kids, most of the people go through it are teens, that it was crazy and yet still had to go through that process. And that was just a real interesting dissonance to me.
Yeah, it's really true. And it's actually been one of the issues we've struggled with when we are trying to litigate these cases. So in other words, we look for cases where we can litigate against especially licensed therapists for subjecting people to conversion therapy. But one of the issues is that often it takes people like really years. And it's interesting because this is true of Delia and Ernest in your book too, but it takes them years to really, come face to face with the trauma that they have experienced through conversion therapy and to be ready to address that. And in the legal world, there are statutes of limitations. There are certain time periods within which you have to bring a claim or you can't do it. And so we've had to get really creative about the ways that we can address this issue, even if somebody's legal claim has lapsed. But yeah, I mean, I love Delia and Ernest for that reason. I mean, if you take a step back from their characters, like really their superpower is that they have an incredible amount of like self confidence. I mean, and so you have this section in the book where you talk about how Delia, they were both in religious communities, and then they experienced this trauma of conversion therapy, and Delia just sort of recreated her religion in her own mind to be basketball. That became her religion. But she could only do that because she recognized that what was happening to her was wrong, and she was strong enough to stand up to that. And I think that's, very true of Ernest too. That's their superpower, that they can come back from that. And I'm curious how much of that came from the research you saw, or maybe even the videos that you're talking about that you saw of these people who are survivors. They really are.
Yeah, it very much came from that. I mean, just reading about people who are adults now. Well, there's a woman, and this is probably on the Born Perfect website. I don't remember where I saw it, but she's now a commissioner for the city of Orlando, Florida. So she's an intelligent, accomplished adult now, but she went through conversion therapy as a kid, and she had sort of one of the most heinous forms of it, which was a deliverance or an exorcism. And she had these pastors telling her that the sin of her homosexuality would leave her body as an orange mucus. And she's sitting there as a kid going, these people are bad. We're not on radio. I can say batshit crazy. She's just like, this is just like nuts. But young people, I mean, they're threatened with losing the love of their families. They're threatened often with losing the love of the only community they've ever known, which is their church community. They're threatened with going to hell. And even if they know, for instance, that, the sin of homosexuality couldn't possibly leave their body as an orange mucus, if they're 15, it's like hell is a pretty scary thing to look at. So yeah, I mean, they're smart. They know, they know this is crazy, but where to go? I mean, where to go to get help at that age, I think, is a really hard thing. One thing that I did is, and when I realized that this book came from a place of rage in myself. I think when that last person was in the presidency, I just felt so much rage. And I wanted to know what to do with that and where it came from. I also wanted to know why the other side, are so enraged. And I think this is kind of the belly of the beast, this hypocrisy of the church and what they're doing to young people. So I wanted to look at that, but I didn't want to spend the next few years writing about rage. That just sounded like a recipe for misery for me. So I flipped the question, and I started doing a bunch of research into happiness, what makes people happy. And then people actually write books on this. They actually get, so, and there's a character in the book who almost gets his PhD in happiness. So I wrote that into him, but it was really fun to learn some things like biophilia, being in beautiful places, which is one reason I set the book in Oregon. A committed community, which worked really well with this book, because that can be a congregation, but it can also be a team. I know as a young person, being on teams, basketball teams, saved my life. That commitment to a bunch of other girls and working towards excellence together. So taking these positive things, and this is a long way to answer your question of how people do heal and what does get people to the other side of that trauma, by studying what makes people happy and doing creative work. So I made Ernest, my character, a poet. So as a poet, he gets to the other side of that trauma through writing poetry. So it helped me write the book, and I hope it helps readers find hope in the book by this focus on how do you get to a happy and peaceful place on the other side of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading the book, I read it at my home and then on an airplane, and I was like writing all these notes to myself. And one of the things I thought was so interesting is that, I mean, that theme of hope really came through to me, that basically you're setting the novel in this place where the town itself and the church that, Delia grew up in, not Ernest, but Delia, have literally transformed in the intervening years. And the question for these characters is whether they're going to transform, like whether they can heal and move forward and become whole in this, changing world. But, there were certain things that you did that I'm curious about, because I found it very refreshing, but I want to hear why you did it. For instance, I'm curious, can we give spoilers for the book? I think we can give spoilers.
I think so. I never worry about spoilers. Yeah.
I just when I was reading it, I was like, okay, is there going to be this sort of confrontation between Delia and the pastor who subjected her to this conversion therapy? And you didn't do that in the book, which I loved about it. And we can talk more about why, but I'm just curious about why you made that decision and why you dealt with him sort of the way you did.
I didn't want to give him any more play than he deserved. So he had a little bit, but yeah. And what I did do, and maybe this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I didn't want to just trash Christianity. I actually don't believe that Christian religion, I think it's supposed to be about love and community. And that's what's so enraging about what they're doing, how hateful these people are. It's baffling. I wish I understood that, how they took this faith idea that's supposed to be about love and turn it into this hateful thing. So I wanted to make that point by, rather than just showing how hateful some of them are, I include a pastor halfway through who's actually a Christian and who's actually compassionate and inclusive and not homophobic. And I enjoy surprising my main character with this character, the pastor character. And also, it's just my way of saying, look, there's this other thing that could happen. What's really interesting to me, and I'll ask you about this too, is in my research, I found that a lot of young people who've been through conversion therapy, I just assumed they would all turn from the church and never go back. And a lot of them stay in the Christian church. That's one of the reasons I gave my character Ernest. He doesn't quite stay in the church, but he doesn't leave it as clearly as Delia does. And they just look for, and once they realize that the conversion therapy experience isn't Christian, they look for an inclusive church. And that's just really interesting to me, that they often stay with the faith.
Yeah, I think that is really true. Religion and acceptance are often one and the same, and they are not mutually exclusive. But obviously, some congregations force these issues on LGBTQ kids. We are, as part of our project, we track both licensed therapists and religious counselors around the country who we know about, and there are thousands of them. And to me, anyway, it is quite shocking that churches or pastors or ministers or rabbis or priests, would tell families that they have to choose between their children and their religion, which is also often their community. And that is shocking to me. I think that's a shameful, awful choice to give to any person, choose your church or your child. But that is often what happens. And, in your book, I think that's precisely what leads Delia to find her community and her belief system somewhere else. And the same is true for Ernest. And I think that's true for, lots of kids who are put in that position, and families. We do conversations we do projects with religious communities, and that's part of kind of our message. Like, why would you do that to families? Why would you subject them to that? It's not a choice. You're just asking them to either reject their child or their community, and no one should ever be asked to do either of those things.
Do you ever get answers to that question? And do you ever move them along towards being more inclusive and more compassionate?
I hope we do. The people who will even speak to us, I think, are much further along in this thinking, and they're more in the category of, we haven't dealt with this issue yet in our in our church. Either, we haven't had a trans kid in our congregation that we know of. Like, please tell us, like, what can we do? What should we be thinking of? There's certainly that. I mean, I completely agree with you. Religious communities and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and beliefs are not one and the same by any, stroke of the imagination. But it is also true that much of this does happen within religious communities, and that it's, I hope and wish that the future of that is really going to change and be different.
When you say you track these pastors and these mental health professionals, what does that mean? You have like a list of people who are doing conversion therapy, or what does track them mean?
Yes, we do. we have a list.
I love it.
I know. I was looking at I don't know the actual specific names of people, but I have the data. We have a statistician who helps us to do sort of numbers crunching things, who works in our Born Perfect project. But yeah, I was looking at Oregon because that's where your novel is based, and we're tracking 52 conversion therapists who we know of who are operating in that state. And like the biggest places are California, which probably people would not.
Wow. Yeah.
Guess.
And that's 52 now, today.
52
practicing right now, currently.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, there's like more than 4,000 therapists who we are tracking nationwide. And then I think another 1,000 organizations too that we're tracking. So the numbers are really shocking, and it is not by any stretch limited to, more rural locations or southern states or red states. I mean, it's really all over the country.
I mean, one thing I've run into a little bit talking to people about this book, in fact, I was interviewed by a guy who said, yeah, I did a little research and I didn't find anything. And he was not accusing me of making this up, but it felt like it was edging up to that. And I think a lot of us who move in very progressive circles and communities, and, it's like, what's the big deal? There's Ellen DeGeneres and Billy Porter and Lily Tomlin and Laverne Cox, like all these very out queer people. Like, we're over that, aren't we? And I feel like some people don't realize. I mean, I was shocked at your numbers you just gave of how many of these people you're tracking. And I don't quite know how to answer these people. That your numbers are good. I will use them. But yeah, how to respond when people kind of don't really believe it's this ugly.
Well, I mean, I think part of that comes from the fact that it is intentionally secretive when this is happening. And that's true of the conversion therapy that you highlight in your book too. It's happening at this religious camp. The parents don't really know. If they do know, it's like a very vague concept of what's happening. They do not know the specifics. The children are not allowed to interact with each other in any meaningful way. They're discouraged from forming friendships, from, having any sort of emotional connection with each other. And there's one character who is a sexual predator because, he's operating in this community of such secrecy. And that is why the conversion therapy is flourishing, because it's, and the children's parents don't even know. And that's sort of, our experience too. Like, the parents may have some sort of vague notion, or, maybe they made an initial decision to send their children because they were told wrongly by a therapist or a pastor that, this is something pathological that we can cure. But they don't know. They often don't know the specifics of what happens to their kids. And then it becomes, lifelong issues that children and then who then become adults have to work through with their families based on, what has happened during that time.
So as an attorney for Born Perfect, does a whole family come to you? How does that usually, I mean, what happens? Like years later, a trauma is recognized or harm is recognized, and they come to you and ask you to, what, go after this pastor or this a professional? How does that work?
Yeah, we've done it. I mean, so we did have a litigation by Kate McCobb several years ago. She actually was not a minor when this happened, and she was, she was in California. She was not in, and she was 25 years old when she first went to therapy, and she was not going to therapy for even being gay, but that was what her therapist then fixated on. And then he sort of told her repeatedly that it was pathological, that he could solve it for her, that he could rewire her brain. I mean, to your question about, is it the entire family who comes to us? Usually not. Usually it's, a young person or a young adult who is often still has, residual issues with their parents and their families because of what has happened. And, many of them eventually really do work through that, and they have a great relationship with their parents. But often when we see people, they're still, in that process of working through it.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I made my Ernest character is past all that with his family and now has a great relationship he's an only child with his parents. And I really wanted to show how that, again, that healing stage of life, both of my characters are 25 years past being at the camp, the celebration camp, where they underwent this therapy together. So yeah, I really like showing that. My Delia character, not so much. Her rage is just sort of catching up to her nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's typical though. And then, and then she faces it as,
Yeah, as you pointed out, she sort of stuck basketball in there and we use this like perfecting herself, perfecting her body, perfecting everything, and that you can only do that for so many years.
Well, yeah, and you have characters, like Delia and Ernest are such fighters, and they're survivors, but then you have other characters like Shauna, who is like, I think you should talk about Shauna, but she's sort of like the opposite of Delia. But anyway, which is also very, like, you see these people who have, repressed like feelings, and what happens to them as adults when that happens. And then you have Cal who doesn't fare as well as, Delia and Ernest. And anyway, I'd love to hear you say more about those characters.
Were you surprised when Shauna showed up?
I was surprised when she showed up.
So was I. It was one of those things like, oh, yeah, she could still be there. So for viewers and listeners and readers now, so Shauna, early on in the book is the girl that my main character gets caught kissing by their pastor. And that's what starts the trajectory of Delia, the main character, being sent off to celebration camp for conversion therapy. We don't know what happened. Well, we know a little bit about what happens to Shauna. They separate after the camp. They want to get as far away from each other as possible to prove they're not gay. But then much later in the novel, Delia finds out what has happened to Sean. And I can't really tell you that because that would be a spoiler, but yeah. So.
But it's interesting because you put their different life paths together, and I don't know, it rang true to me when I was reading the book.
Good. Yeah. And then there's a third child who Ernest and Delia were with at the camp too. And they don't know anything that happens to him for a long, long time. They have ideas about what happened and they think they're pretty sure, but they don't find out for sure until, actually, I guess they don't find out, do they? But the reader does.
Never do. Yeah, I think they don't. Well, you hope that they will, later.
I think that they will, I think. I think the hint is there that will happen. Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, I really hope that, I've crafted a story that offers hope and relief. There's a term in literature called trauma porn. And there's a whole lot of it out there where, you know, the entire novel just mucks in the painful, wounded place. And I don't like reading that. I don't want to write that. I mean, I just think it's ever so much more interesting to find out how we move out. I mean, all of us to some degree have trauma and pain, and how we move out of that, and how do we get to a healthy place and a happy place. It's much harder to write. I think it's pretty easy to talk about how we're all disconnected from, you know, sort of family disconnection, all that's a lot easier to write about in a way than family connection. I mean, one relationship I kind of enjoyed writing, but that was hard to write in the book, was Delia's relationship with her brother. Because while her brother didn't go through conversion therapy, he's a struggling guy. He hasn't quite pulled himself together. And yet she loves her brother and feels as if she's her brother's keeper, and has to take care of him because she has done a much better job as a survivor of their childhood. So,
well, yeah, and because he, you know, has saved her at different periods throughout, or at least sort of come to her rescue, and she feels like she is indebted to him. Yeah.
And that's really common in families where there's one person who almost throws themselves under the train to save another sibling. It happens a lot. And it's not quite that dramatic in this story, but there's some of that where he takes care of her and sort of sets her on the way towards healing, and is left behind a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say personally, I also appreciated the themes of hope, and I also appreciated not delving into, you know, for instance, a confrontation with people. And I love the way that you dealt with those issues, because I feel like it gave the reader a real relief from from experiencing that trauma with the characters. And you know, like, our whole world is full of trauma right now, and certainly, you know, the rash of anti-LGBTQ laws that are passing around the country. And so, you know, as a person who's sort of enmeshed in that every day, it was such a pleasure to read this book that touches on these issues and you know, deals with them in this really interesting and complex way, but without, you know, re-traumatizing the reader.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't want to re-traumatize the reader. One thing I've been thinking about is the continuum of homophobia. I mean, exorcisms and deliverances that happen in conversion therapy are one very heinous end of homophobia. But just having to listen to Ron DeSantis on the news every night is a form of emotional violence, you know, that all of us go through. And I think they're all part of the same thing. Ron DeSantis's hate speech enables, you know, pastors and mental health professionals to do what they do with conversion therapy. So it's all part of the same thing. And that's one reason I wanted to just dive into this worst form of it and unearth it and show the hypocrisy, because I think we all, I was not subjected to conversion therapy, but we all have some of that trauma from the homophobia that's out there now. And unfortunately, as you say, it's kind of scary right now. It's taken a turn. I mean, I even feel it, you know, when my partner and I are, you know, on BART, I feel like people glare and they feel unleashed and like as if the hate just feels more welcome now, it's okay. Even in the Bay Area, you know, like you say, a lot of this stuff happens in California. It's not necessarily, it feels a lot safer in the Bay Area. I travel a lot, and it's a lot nicer there than, say, in rural Oregon, where there's signs still celebrating the last president everywhere. But it's all part of the same continuum.
Well, yeah. And I think homophobia is so intertwined with sexism, of course, and racism. And, you know, I thought it was interesting, Delia's character, because I do think that, you know, girls who play sports are subjected to that kind of sort of gender policing. And certainly for her character actually reminded me a lot of someone who we were representing when we filed a licensing board complaint against her therapist in the state where she was, and she was an athlete. And you know, the therapist told her that she was too athletic, that that she walked too masculinely, that she should lose weight. And, you know, she was a child. I mean, she was a teenager, a young teenager, you know, and she made her lose a unhealthy amount of weight. And she, you know, encouraged her to date boys, even when she would tell this person, you know, I'm not actually attracted to that boy. I don't have any feelings for him. And the therapist would be like, that doesn't matter. Just keep at it. I mean, it's just like,
I have been subjected to all of the above, you know. I mean, that's without conversion therapy per se. Exactly.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I remember my mother saying to me when I came out to her, you know, I won't say her exact words because they're embarrassing. She's like, you don't have to like it, you know, just do it. It's like, why?
Well, who is that serving? And like, I mean, you know,
that is the question. Who is that serving? Yes. Sorry, I interrupted you, but it's such a good question.
No, yeah. I mean, really, I mean, where is that coming from? And why is that so important to people? And why isn't it just as important that somebody, you know, be happy or be able to express their own true self, or that they can find joy the way they need to? I don't know. It's very alarming.
That's, you know, I have answers for everything. I talk, you know, figure things out. I say what I think, but that's the one I can't figure out. Like why these people would take, you know, just sticking with what my book's about, this Christian faith, and use it in this hateful way. I don't know who it is serving. I mean, there's really obvious answers, like you were mentioning. There's, you know, at some of these camps, it's not uncommon for there to be adult predators, you know, so it's people who are gay themselves and hate themselves so much that they try to exercise it out of other people. So there's the self-hatred. I mean, often as not, when someone is very homophobic, they're gay themselves. I hate to say it, but that's true a lot. But it's not always true. And it's just, I don't understand why people care. You know, it's one thing, you know, to think you need to stop murders because they're murdering people, but people who are loving people.
Think we may have lost Lucy for a moment.
Okay, I couldn't tell if it was her or if it was me.
Let's see if she comes back. Maybe she'll text me and get better instructions. But thank you so much for the conversation that we've had thus far. It has been really incredible hearing about some of these facts that, like Lucy said, just like I'm kind of immersed in this world as well. And like, how are there that many in that you're tracking? Like, it just is kind of baffling. Chris has questions for Lucy Jane, so hopefully she will be back soon.
Yeah, I'm assuming she's gonna log back in because now she's completely disappeared.
Yeah, I hope so, but she might text me as well. But I'll ask you a couple of questions. What do you feel like, especially in your roles that you hold, do you feel like there has been any progress that has changed in the last 10 or 15 years that maybe do give people a glimmer of hope?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the reason why we're seeing such a, I don't know if calling it backlash is the right thing, but I'll just call it a backlash at the moment of these, you know, anti-LGBTQ laws, is because there was such an incredible amount of progress that was made, especially in this country over the last 10 years related to these issues, you know, marriage equality, making sure that parents don't have children taken away from them just because they're gay or trans, you know, fighting employment discrimination, fighting discrimination in other places. There's been an incredible amount of progress made related to LGBTQ people. And so I think that there's a lot to be hopeful for, and a lot of great things that have happened, and we just need to make sure that we maintain that.
I'm troubleshooting with Lucy Jane.
I'm
not just answering the phone call randomly.
I know you're also tech support, Jane, so you wear many hats.
Yeah, I mean, it should just work from the same thing you were. All right, I'm gonna send you the link again, and then I'm gonna ask Amy another question. We're chatting. We're having a good time. All right, so this has the StreamYard link again, which hopefully maybe just clicking on that will work. Okay, Amy, I'll keep you on the phone, Lucy Jane, because maybe we'll just do speakerphone. I don't know. We've done that before. It's not as good, but it'll still get some ideas across. For you, Amy, Chris is asking, isn't conversion therapy illegal in some states?
Yes. I think that there's about 20 states right now that ban conversion therapy of minors through statutes. Another 5 or so states ban it by executive order, and I think another one by a regulation. And also, even when there are not laws on the books specifically about conversion therapy, there are other ways that you can challenge it. For instance, we had a case where we we sued a conversion therapist for consumer fraud. In other words, basically taking money in exchange for lying to people about their claim that being gay is pathological or is something that needs to be cured. So yes, there's a lot of options available for folks. I hope I'm still here. Shane apparently is also gone. Okay.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I just suddenly everything went away. Thank you for carrying it. I'm back. I hope our audience is still here.
They may have left with you, Lucy. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think they're still here.
It was just a power for the whole internet. Everyone went away. Everyone will be back in a second. But let's finish up. I want to get back to just a quick going back to what you were talking about. And I do apologize if you did answer this question. My attention was not fully on your answer. Unfortunately, I'm going to go back and watch it. But Chris is asking, how about Missouri specifically? And Rico is asking, I apologize if that is not pronounced correctly. In states where conversion therapy is now illegal, how hard is it to get the authorities to shut down church-sponsored conversion therapy programs? That's specifically for Amy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, much of the statutes that ban conversion therapy is really, really targeted toward licensed social workers or therapists, people who have a state license to practice, therapy generally. And so normally we're still trying to figure out really how to target conversion therapy that's originating within churches, but it's a trickier legal issue in this country to be able to target that. So we've done things like recently we've been partnering with some religious groups. We're finishing up a multi-year project with Dignity USA and the LGBTQ plus Roman Catholic Network. That's basically to educate Catholics, but by raising the voices of Catholic conversion therapy survivors. But I want to be clear, this is not limited to Catholicism or Christian faiths. I mean, our Born Perfect director actually experienced conversion therapy within his synagogue, his conservative synagogue where he grew up in New York. So, but yeah, we have different ways of getting at that, and working with groups to try to target it and make sure it's not happening.
Yeah, I think you said you're partnering with other religious groups. Was that part of one thing you said?
They're sort of like Dignity USA or the LGBTQ plus Roman Catholic Network. So they're LGBTQ people within religious organizations who we're working with.
Because I have a cousin who is a pastor, and she's very progressive and inclusive and not homophobic. And I asked her, how come the religious left is not standing up more and speaking out more? And she said, well, we are, but we don't get the media. So I thought, I mean, that's a really interesting idea to partner more with religious groups who are not doing these things. And it seems like that would be really helpful if, one Christian could talk to another Christian perhaps and ask, how is this Christian?
Yeah. Or even, parents who, obviously most parents are not trying to harm their children. And research has shown that when parents are informed and have real information about conversion therapy that's based on, the fact that every medical and mental health association, for instance, in this country has basically exposed it as fraud and abuse. That, when parents have real information that is based on facts and not lies, like that they do the right thing by their children. The problem is when they are told either by religious conversion therapists or licensed people, oh, your child is sick and I can help them and I can cure it, that they would even, think of doing such a thing.
All right. Do we want to take some more questions from the audience?
Sure.
Okay. First off, I want to say, Lucy Jane, you weren't here for me to say how interesting and incredible I found this conversation. I know the audience has as well. Chris, for Lucy Jane knows, but Chris, the owner of the bookstore and longtime Lucy Jane Bledsoe fan.
And I'm a longtime fan of Chris.
Chris has several comments and questions, and we also have a couple of questions from Rico. But I wanted to start with one of Chris's because I want to piggyback off of it. So Chris says, as asking Lucy Jane, I feel like you wrote this book with an ear to a young adult audience reading it. Did you?
Well, that's a good question. I have recently written for young adults, and my characters are young adults. I mean, when they're looking back at their young adulthood. I did write it for adults, but I have wondered a few times if it's appropriate for YA. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's probably not, but it could for certain mature teen readers. So I think it could probably go both ways.
My question to piggyback off of that was before we got on screen or went live, you were talking about how you were doing some school visits. And I know you've done quite a few of them. So I wanted to ask you, especially as a queer adult, what type of response or reactions to some of these stories, possibly your last book, possibly this new book, from younger adults, and what their reaction is to reading your stories.
Young adults today, as in high school age kids, are just fabulous. I mean, they are, at least the ones I'm meeting with, they're so much more open than most people in my generation were. They're just really cool about gender justice and gender politics. And I just have so much hope for that next generation. I have found no problems at all with young people talking about all kinds of stuff like this. They're just open to it. They want to hear about it. They're horrified by injustice in a way that I think there's been a little bit of a lapse for a while in terms of young people stepping up. And this generation really is stepping up.
Rico has some questions for Amy. And I'll try to, because I think some of this has been talked about, but again, apologies that my attention was not always super focused on your answers, Amy. But Amy, I'd love to hear your advice about how to best support a friend who's experienced conversion therapy but isn't looking to take legal action, and asking for some free resources that you might recommend for a survivor. If you have any links that you were comfortable sharing or had at the ready to answer that, I think it would be appreciated.
Yeah, every person is different, so take this with a grain of salt. But I think for some people, they can find it really meaningful to connect with other people who have had those experiences. And that's part of what our Born Perfect network does. It sort of connects folks with other people who have had those experiences. They're not all the same, but there's a lot of similar threads. There are a lot of similar experiences. And sometimes it can just be really healing to have somebody to talk to about that. I think also having a supportive counselor, it can be incredibly helpful for folks, and really healing too, especially if they've experienced conversion therapy from a licensed therapist, to then, speak to somebody who's actually qualified to talk to them and about their life, and not just conversion therapy, whatever issues that might be coming up. There's a lot of people who have experienced conversion therapy who are doing work in that field. One of the guys that we filed a licensing board complaint for in Kentucky, he now has his own sort of survivor network, and I think part of that is he sets up meetings for folks to participate with each other, basically like group therapy sessions, and not always therapy, but also just group sessions together. So some of those things I think would certainly be helpful.
I want to share a comment from Chris. Chris says, if you're old enough for conversion therapy, you're old enough to read this book.
There you go. Yeah.
But Chris wanted to, here it is. Can you talk about the whole plot thread around the girls' basketball team?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier at the top of the hour that for me, playing basketball on a team was really life-saving, and finding a place where, Amy was mentioning girls are often told to lose weight, not walk like a boy, all this stuff. I found a place where I could learn to love my body and the strength in it. And that was a good thing. And it was life-saving. So that was just another way I wanted to show hope and the possibility of where girls, in the case of that character or those characters, could find the strength. And also I found my own voice through basketball. I found a way to talk about who I was. I found a group of friends who were also, a lot of them were lesbians even before we knew it, but I was feeling it was my people. So I'm that part about how I wanted to write a story that showed how people survive, not just how they fall apart. And team sports were a way I survived, and the love and friendship and the hard work of being on a team of girls. So that's mainly why I included that part of the story.
I think that, sorry, my eyes are very tired, so I'm trying to get as close. In states where conversion therapy is now illegal, did I already ask this? How hard is it to get the authorities to shut down church-sponsored conversion therapy programs? I did not ask that, but I don't know if you answered it or not.
No, I think you did ask that one.
Did I?
I'm sorry, my internet kicked me off here and I messed things up.
Well, that's of all the things that all the wild things that I've done on these virtual events, I never get embarrassed, but I am kind of embarrassed that I actually asked the same question twice. I am so sorry.
Shane, you're like the definition of multitasking, so do not feel.
Yeah, just that you're running this whole thing, it's great. Yeah.
Chris has another question, saving me from my embarrassment. How is the book being received so far?
Fantastically. It's been a really, really nice rollout. I got, for people who know about publishing, I got a lot of advanced reviews, which is nice because you want advanced reviews and you don't always get them. And some post publication reviews are coming in. So far, they've all been really good. So I've been really happy about that. I always love it when people say, and I've had a few people a couple interviews I've done where the interviewer, in both of these cases, it was the man, had to say, I'm like straight. I'm really straight, but like I really enjoyed this book, and I found characters I could relate to, and so I guess I'm sort of making fun of the interviewer, but I appreciate that. I appreciate when people. I always feel like the whole point of reading is to move beyond your own boundaries and to cross over and find out about other people. So I love hearing when my stories can do that, and people can read about these queer characters even when they're straight and enjoy the story. Because we certainly read a lot of straight stories and enjoy them. So,
yeah. Amy, do you, since lawyers write all the time, but have you ever considered possibly writing like fiction like this, or
oh my God,
nonfiction?
I am definitely not qualified, but I'm a big fan of fiction, but I would feel sorry for whoever had to read that from. Maybe if I quit my job and did some real serious work in that direction, maybe, but no, I am not qualified.
Amy, what's next for Born Perfect? Where are you guys headed?
Trying to get through this legislative session, not just for Born Perfect, but for everything. Doing more work with religious groups to try to target this conversion therapy that's happening within religious communities. Always looking for folks who, even if they don't want to bring a lawsuit, like Rico's friend, maybe they want to do something different. Like maybe they want to file a complaint against the therapist, assuming that they're still practicing, or maybe they just want their voice to be heard. Maybe they want to tell their story. Maybe they could publish an op-ed, or they could record one of the videos. It sounds like Lucy watched when she was doing research. So, there's a lot of ways that folks can confront what's happened to them. And I hope that we are just, one resource for people to do that. And there are many, many others, and other people doing this great work and shining a light on it, like you did, Lucy, covering such an important topic in this book. I think it's going to reach a wider audience, which is always helpful.
I would love it to reach some religious audiences. I know the publicist on the book is connecting with some churches. I have a couple congregations who are going to have me come speak. And so, I would really love that. And do that thing we were talking about earlier about some congregations maybe could help speak to other congregations.
Yeah. Mentoring.
Yes, mentoring. Yeah.
All right. Well, do you want to either of you send us off with one last question?
Well, Lucy, you didn't do this during this event, which is, read a little piece from the book, but I'm curious what piece you normally do read.
Well, if I was going to read it, I know we talked about it, I decided not to because I just wanted to talk, but there's the very first moment when Delia shows up at the camp, and she's actually sent to the camp without being told. She just thinks it's a Christian camp. And she slowly starts looking at all the kids thinking, how come all the why are these kids all so interesting and creative? And, it seems like all the boring kids are left at home. And then she meets Ernest, and she meets their other friend, Cal. And she's only 13. She's very young for this camp. She slowly gets it. Oh my God, all these kids are queer. And so I like to read that part because it shows the, Ernest is already mocking what's going on. There's dating lessons, but he's already mocking it and they're making fun of it. And so it shows that moment where their friendship is just starting and they're being subjected to this stuff and also know how nuts it is.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for the conversation. Lucy Jane, it's always a pleasure to work an event for you, to get to see you again. Amy, thank you for all of your knowledge, your incredible questions, and just your positive kind of atmosphere that you provide.
Thank you both. This was really, really wonderful. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
I want to thank the audience as well. A reminder, because we have had several people join us in the last couple of minutes, we do have books available for sale at left-bank.com. So just look for Lucy Jane Bledsoe and all of her books will come up. We so much thank you for attending tonight, for supporting our event series, and buying a book. Thank you so much. Everyone have a fantastic rest of your evening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.